the EVP of Renewable Energy Development from PLN. Selamat sore, Ibu.
Sorry, hi, good afternoon.
Okay, great. I would like to remind you that this webinar is live streamed on YouTube, and we have live interpretation. You can have it on your Zoom application. You can choose from, if I speak in English, then there will be interpretation to Indonesian side. And whenever our panelists or there's a questions needs to be asked, but they're more comfortable in speaking in Indonesian, then our participants and panelists from abroad can also use the interpretation from Indonesian to English. Okay. Without further ado, I would like to invite Kanika first to share India's experience in boosting the solar energy there, because we have heard so many great stories about India's solar mission. So we want to hear more how India is actually doing this right and having ambitious target for even 100 gigawatt of solar energy soon. The room is yours, please, Kanika.
Thank you so much, Citra. I'm going to share my screen. I think you're going to have to stop sharing your screen before I can share mine. Okay, great. I think I can do it now. Thank you.
Mungkin dengan itu kita akan kasih lihat videonya untuk
Can you see my slides? Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Citra, and to the IESR for inviting me here this afternoon, and also actually for the interest to kind of find collaborative opportunities and lessons from the transition that we've made in India. I think that the energy transition in every country is going to be unique, and but there is still the opportunity for countries to learn from each other. And I'm very happy today to be able to share India's experience and also to have again the opportunity to be on the same panel as Mr. Yaya. We did a recent presentation for him actually, and have also engaged with EDSM in the past. So again, it's our great privilege to be here. So thank you very much. As Citra said, my name is Kanika Chavla, and I'm the director of the CEW Center for Energy Finance. The Council on Energy, Environment and Water is a non-profit policy and research institution based in New Delhi. And we think about a variety of resource management related issues, I would say. As our name suggests, it's not just energy, but also environment, water, and other issues. But at the Center for Energy Finance, we think very much about enabling the energy transition in emerging economies. And so, which is also why we are keenly interested in observing and supporting the energy transition in Indonesia, and today share the lessons from India. One of the things I wanted to talk about before even sort of talking about India's example is actually the broad learnings from what is happening in the world. There's a lot of attention that the energy transition is now receiving in global conversation. However, the conversation is often happening in the global north, whereas, and there is a different kind of transition happening there, which is where energy demand has plateaued, but there is a kind of a replacement of one fuel with sort of cleaner and more modern fuel types. But that's different from the energy transition that we see in emerging economies. So I wanted to kind of set the stage and context for this a little bit. In 2018, we saw $1.8 trillion invested in energy overall. Of course, in the 2019-20 year, that number is 400 billion down because of COVID-related investment decline. But even then, we only see about a third of that go into clean energy investments, which is what we're discussing today. But the more important issue is, despite energy demand growing in developing countries, much of the global investment is going into developed countries. So what we see is that 15% of the world's population actually attracts 40% of the world's energy investment, which is one of the big reasons why the pace of the transition in emerging economies is fairly slow, and much slower than it could possibly be if we received the right kind of facilitative support, one in the form of finance, but also in the form of technology transfer, etc. The other point, and as this graph suggests on this slide, is if you see there is both Brazil and India as kind of leading emerging economies that are in the energy or clean energy space, is that much of the transition is actually being financed by domestic capital rather than international capital. So we need to raise the profile of what our countries are trying to do to really kind of attract international investment and increase the pace at which this transition happens. This is further complicated, again, both for Indonesia and India, because our countries have a complex political economy of having a lot of in-country fossil fuel reserves. And so which also generate jobs, which generate economic value, and make it more difficult for countries to make the transition from, say, thermal-based economies to clean energy-based economies, even though the impact of climate change is going to be borne more by us than by other countries in the world. So with that, I'm going to now dive into, despite all of this being true also for India, what did we do and what did we get right, but also what did we get wrong and what are the learnings, right? So in 2000 and late 2014, early 2015, India announced a clean energy target of 175 gigawatts by 2022. At that point, not only did the world think that that ambition was crazy, even many people within the country thought the ambition was too large, and it was going to be another example of, a developing country kind of promising something that they cannot deliver. However, I'm happy to report that not only are we well on our way to realize this ambition, but rather even, supersede it. And this is just the floor, not the ceiling. And I'm sure Kushagra will talk more from experience about how this has panned out in the solar sector. But when we started out at about 3 or 4 gigawatt of installed solar capacity, wanting to get to 100, we needed to double solar capacity every 18 months. It's difficult when you're going from 3 to 6, but it's even more difficult when you're going from 25 gigawatt to 50 gigawatt. And so related to that, there have been some lessons. But even before I talk about integration, I wanted to talk about where the market stands today. So today we already have about 88 gigawatts of installed renewable energy capacity. This comes on the base of about 350 gigawatts of the entire energy system. And another 62 gigawatts of solar and wind capacity is already in the pipeline. So it's in various stages of tendering and commissioning, and so is likely to become operational in the next 12 to 18 months. A lot of this, and as you'll see from the first graph on the top, there's been a rapid and significant growth in capacity. And this has come, of course, on the back of very clear target setting, but also on the back of price discovery. And price discovery, I think, is twofold. One, of course, the announcement of the very large target kind of established a market for clean energy in India, where developers as well as investors knew with certainty that there was a clear horizon of 5, 8, 10 years in which this market would keep growing. So there was a lot of interest to kind of participate in it. It wasn't a short-term one-time window. It wasn't just one tender, but really there was predictability in the market, which went a long way. Also, the size of the market helped India go from being a price taker to becoming a price maker. When you have such a large market, you are able to do a discovery of lowest tariffs. You're also able to negotiate kind of better long-term contracts, not just on the power purchase agreements, but also with suppliers and things like that. So both solar and wind tariffs, of course, have seen an aggressive decline around the world, but also in India, more specifically and more steeply, I would say, very much based on the large market, the market design, but also on the cost of finance. And that's the point that I wanted to come to next. Sorry. Yeah. So of course, to realize these targets, as I mentioned before, we've seen in the last couple of months, every sector in the world has seen a decline in investments because of the financial and economic impact of COVID-19. But what we have seen actually is that renewable energy investments or investments in clean energy markets and technologies have been more robust than in other sectors. This is not just evidence from India, but evidence from around the world. Evidence from India also suggests that it's less volatile to invest in clean technologies in periods of lull like the one we are seeing now. But it's not just enough to think about investments in sort of solar panels and wind turbines, but also to think about ecosystem effects. So for instance, it's important to think about transmission upgrades, it's important to think about balancing and storage and investing in flexibility. While also thinking about investing in the financial feasibility of the energy utility. In India, of course, we don't have one integrated energy utility like PLN. We have several, but they're all in very poor financial condition. And I know that PLN also has some challenges, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them later in today's session. But also, even when things were better, so let's talk about in the pre-COVID scenario, even though there's a lot of interest from developers as well as investors, we're seeing new developers and investors entering the market and very clear policy determination, we still continue to see that there is a shortfall between the investment required and the investment received. India has plateaued at about $11 billion of clean energy investment every year. This is the second highest in any emerging economy in the world, and $11 billion today, of course, buys you much more renewables than it did 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago, but it's still short of what is required. And one of the reasons for that is, or actually, let's say, what are the two reasons for that? So one is we need more capital, and we need capital to be affordable. So what these graphs actually show you, and I'm sorry, I'm facing some formatting troubles. But basically, maybe if you can just focus on the what's called the May 2017 solar tariff here, what it shows you is that the financing cost, this long gray bar here, is the largest share of renewable energy costs. So for every single unit of, say, solar power or wind power, as much as 60 to 70% in some economies, and now in India, 50 to 65% of that cost is the cost of financing. So this is the cost of servicing your debt and your returns on equity investments. So even though we keep thinking that this is a technology game and that the technology prices will keep coming down and so renewables will get cheaper, eventually that's not true, because the technology cost is already now a small share. So the much of the decline till today has come because of technology costs coming down, but much of the future decline will come because of finance costs coming down. What we have seen, though, is as markets start maturing, so basically between 2014 and 2018, the cost of capital also comes down. So just as we understand the learning curves of technology quite well, we don't always acknowledge that finance also has learning curves. And this is very much based on in-country variables, right? So it's the kind of political risk, it's the currency exchange risk, all of these factors. What is kind of the stability, the political will to support the transition, all of those aspects determine an investor's perception of risk. And what we have seen is that as much as 1.5 to 2.25% decline, or 75 basis points to 125 basis points decline in the cost of borrowing, which still puts us at a higher cost of borrowing than the more developed world, but significantly lower than where we started. But that's the risk perception part. There's still quite a few real risks that plague our market, and we've done a similar study for Indonesia as well. And what we find is actually the proportion of these risks are different in the two countries, but the risks are not completely different from each other. Just their share is different. So the first one, and that's what the graph shows you, is the risk posed by your counterparty. In our case, it's the electricity utilities or discoms with whom we would sign these long-term power purchase agreements. In the Indonesian context, it's likely to be the risk of signing these contracts with PLN and being able to get your money back in time, and the certainty of your cash flows. What this graph shows you actually is that in the last 12 months, the outstanding debt of Indian electricity utilities has grown 70%. Ever since COVID-19 hit, that number has grown by 30%. But let's again talk more generally. This problem has definitely been made worse by COVID, but it is not a COVID problem alone. It's a problem that we've had for quite some time. And we're at the point where the outstanding debt of electricity utilities is so high that even if they have a willingness to honor their contracts, it's not sure that they can. So it's an inability perhaps often to pay on time. And because of that, there's payment delays and in some cases, maybe even defaults. There is then, of course, curtailment risk, which is because a large amount of renewables is being added to the grid. How are you going to do the balancing? And then kind of more infrastructure risks, which are not specific to renewables, which is around currency exchange, land acquisition and construction, and policy uncertainty. And these are risks that affect all infrastructure classes in our countries. So what I will now do is share a few examples of things that have worked well. So what has worked is, of course, access to finance on favorable terms is key. And what we have found is that the same few companies that have done well continue to do well. So in a way, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because companies that, as you develop a better reputation in the market and some track record, you are able to overcome some of the risk perceptions and borrow at lower and lower rates, and then occupy a more dominant market opportunity. That being said, again, because we're a very large market, there is a lot of opportunity for new players as well. The other big success story, I would say, in India has been around solar parks. Of course, all of these are examples of things that have gone right in the utility scale solar, and not so much sort of the smaller decentralized renewable space. But one of the big challenges has been land acquisition, connectivity to the transmission infrastructure, and attracting investment for international players, because they are not as familiar with the Indian context. And so what we've seen is that international IPPs almost, disproportionately prefer the solar park route, which is what is called a plug and play route, where what we find is that a lot of these companies just come in, and if they already have access to the land, they have access to the transmission network, and they really just need to begin operations. So despite having to pay a cost premium for that, companies, especially international developers, prefer that. And that's one way that the government has responded to one of the market risks, by creating this opportunity for solar parks. Another one is, again, as I was saying, the market design. Because there's a very clear tendering schedule, and the tender sizes are quite large, and companies have, again, developed a certain kind of familiarity with the market, what that has done is the average size of projects has increased. So we are no longer seeing kind of 50 megawatt, 100 megawatt kind of bids, but more 400 megawatts, 500 megawatts on a 2 gigawatt tender. The reason I share this is because not every country is at this point yet, but it's important to know that you can get there, and that the development or the dynamism of the market is such that it happens very quickly. So we've gone from those 50 megawatt to 500 megawatt project sizes in a matter of 3 to 4 years. So it's actually very, as the name of this webinar suggests, going kind of megawatt to gigawatt, it's not as difficult as one would imagine. So well begun is kind of half done. So then what is kind of the role, I would imagine, of one is, of course, of announcing large policies, but what is the role of government money? And this is where a lot of my research focus lies. And I think it's really important to kind of think about this in the developing country context. Developing countries do not have unlimited capital. And so it's important for them to think about how to use limited amount of public money in a way that creates the most amount of leverage. I'm not going to cover everything on this slide because that's another webinar in and of itself, but I'm going to leave this here, and I'd be happy to take any questions or any kind of comments that any of you had on this. This is things that have been tried in other sectors, so they're not completely new, but they are ways to create momentum in the clean energy sector as well. So really, what does that mean to kind of be serious about making the transition, and what are the lessons from India? One is continue raising your ambition. It's not enough to sort of announce the ambition and then do nothing about it. You have to just announce it and then break it down into the baby steps that are required to reach it. And this is kind of from my observation of India, this is what happened. We announced the 175, and if we would have stopped there, we would have never gotten there. But we then created a schedule of tenders, we created a market design, we created financial support mechanisms, all the things that are required to go together. It's not a one-stop shop. The second one is contracts, right? Contracts must be honored. There is a lot of challenges in our power sectors in most emerging economies, especially in India and Indonesia. But it's important to actually solve those problems if we are serious about creating this market. The thing is, when you let, say, a more well-developed sector like the thermal sector down, it's resilient. It's had decades of support, and so it still survives. But when you do that for more nascent sectors like, say, solar or renewables broadly, those sectors don't necessarily ever recover from failed contracts. So it's important to not to make sure that doesn't happen. Dealing with integration and the role of storage is especially important in the context of Indonesia, but equally also is lessons from India can be applied there. And lastly, very important that we should not think of this, especially in emerging economies, as a coal versus renewable story. We are growing markets and we need to have kind of all of the above approach where we can continue to keep adding renewable energy capacity while we still make our existing thermal power plants more efficient and fit for purpose for a modern day energy system. So I will stop with that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thanks, Kanika, for that insightful comments and observation on India's growth. I have several questions, but perhaps you can answer that later in our Q&A session. I particularly noted that you say transitioning from the megawatt scale to the gigawatt scale is actually not that difficult. However, I would like to see how your perspective on Indonesia's condition right now, because it seems like joining the gigawatt club is a little bit hard to do or difficult or even far-fetched, but I realized that India has done it multiple times, doubling the target, and even will be reaching 100 gigawatts soon. So maybe you can comment on that later. And also I noticed that you also observed on the being the price maker and not the price taker. I think there will be question on that because currently it's always the perception of renewable energy prices versus fossil fuel energy prices. And when it's being compared like from each other, there's always a discourse that fossil fuels energy is much cheaper for Indonesian condition, but we'll see that it's actually not true anymore in global level and also in India's level. Thank you for that. And I will also make this time for Mr. Kusagra from SunSource Energy. Kanika also talked about how to provide a conducive environment for private sectors to play in India's target for solar growth. So I would like to hear your experience as a private player on how to make steps in the solar development in India and what you feel most supportive in terms of policy and also market conditions so that solar energy can grow this fast in India. The time is yours.
Thank you. And thanks, Kanika. It was enlightening as always, especially your views and CEW's views. And truly appreciate the work which you guys have done to support the policy initiative in this country. And glad that you're pushing the envelope every time. Really appreciate it. May I request my presentation to come up, or shall I share my screen? Thank you. Can you make it full screen, please? Thank you. So I represent SunSource Energy. We are India-based, India-headquartered solar energy developer. We focus primarily on the commercial industrial projects, not on the utility scale, large scale projects, but have good experience scaling up renewables in India, and especially now we're working in Southeast Asia. We can actually move to the next slide. So we have been operating in Southeast Asia for the last few years, especially out of Singapore, where our Southeast Asian headquarters is based out of. Go to the last slide, please. Can we go to the last slide? The previous slide. I think we have to go back. I think we're going to go one more back slide. Thank you. In Southeast Asia, we have been active in Singapore, Philippines, doing some projects in Thailand, as well as in Vietnam. And in India, we now operate in across 24 states and have multiple offices. And in addition to India and Southeast Asia, we also do some development work in few other countries as well, and do a lot of design engineering portfolio work for some US-based clients. We are also an investee company of a fund called NEEF Fund, which is a joint fund of India's largest bank, State Bank of India, and the UK government through UK DFID. We can go to the next slide, please. So the focus area for us is majorly on commercial industrial rooftops, generally behind the meter, but we have also implemented multiple large ground mount projects, be it tracking system, tilt, seasonal tilt, fixed tilt projects. And we have also been doing multiple storage, solar plus storage projects, including hybrid. And we have some examples in next few slides, including solar and hybrid storage together, or hybrid with diesel genset, to bring down the energy cost. And then we have been also implementing some floating solar projects as well. We can go to the next slide. Here are some more examples. The top on the left-hand side, and this shows how the Indian market has scaled up. So we have, for example, we have been operating for last 10 years in this market. And as Kaneka mentioned, the policies have been very clear, both for the utility scale as well as on the behind the meter, on net metering side as well. So because of which we have been having opportunities to reduce the cost of energy generation for the end client. So this example on the top left-hand corner shows an example where we have implemented a 10 megawatt rooftop project, behind the meter project, for a large industrial textile company in one of the northern states in India. The right-hand one is an example of a floating solar project, which we have implemented for India's largest oil company, Indian Oil Corporation. And then we have implemented on the right-hand side, lower side, at Delhi Airport, rooftop solar project. And these have been possible due to very clear net metering policies in majority of these cases, and the approvals which are required to implement these projects. And since the electricity tariffs are the highest structure for the electricity tariffs are for industrial commercial clients. So there is and these projects were built without any subsidies coming in. And so there was a pure play case of reducing almost 30 to 40%, in certain cases, even 50% of the electricity tariffs, which customers were paying to the discoms. We can move to the next slide. So what did India did right? I think a lot of these points were already covered by Kaneka, but as it was clear from earlier session as well, we set up a long-term target. And in about 2010, we were almost at a 10 megawatt installed capacity across the country. And we plan to now go up to 20 gigawatt by 2022. Actually, this is a typo. It was now it's at 100 gigawatt by 2022. And the other point is the government of India formed a nodal agency by the name of Solar Energy Corporation of India to conduct the bids, large-scale bids, and to be a single point of contact to sign the majority of the utility scale PPAs. And so this, and they in turn coordinated with other state nodal agencies, with the land banks, which were held with the revenue departments with multiple states. and developers could actually focus on doing their work, building out these projects. So the role of Solar Energy Corporation of India became very, very important. And this agency was formed only a few years ago, and this due to this, it became a success story, what India is today in terms of solar deployment. The other thing is India is now pushing for renewable energy purchase obligations, although there are still challenges around it, but there is a real push now which is coming in. The other thing is in India, there are multiple states, and each state has a nodal agency. They now, majority of the states have their own respective targets for achieving the rooftop and the utility scale solar megawatts. The other interesting part which has come in India is the large generation companies, NTPC and NHPC. NTPC stands for National Thermal Power Corporation, and NHPC stands for National Hydropower Corporation. These agencies, which were traditionally either hydro or thermal, they have now become one of the largest implementer of solar assets. And interestingly, now the newer portfolio which are coming in is majority is coming in from the solar perspective. So these agencies which have either they had their own land banks, or they are basically acquiring land banks to implement large scale solar projects, hundreds and gigawatt of solar projects. So this shows a dynamism of, because both NTPC and NHPC realized that if they have to grow, they basically will have to change their business model. So they are basically aggressively working on to adopt more and more solar in place. Interestingly, what has also happened is because these solar projects, large scale utility scale projects have been implemented in areas where the land was much cheaper and the radiation was higher. But unfortunately, the transmission network was not very strengthened in those areas. So the Power Grid Corporation of India also jumped in. So they are strengthening the power grid lines to ensure the evacuation happens, and the projects are including World Bank, ADB, KfW, other multilaterals as well. So they are also providing concessional loans, both for utility scale projects as well as behind the meter rooftop projects as well. And they're tying up with the local banks to provide the concessional financing for these solar projects. We can go to the next slide, please. So for the utility scale projects, so we definitely moved to a model of solar parks where Solar Energy Corporation of India worked out with focused developers who were interested only in developing either solar parks with the government, and then other developers coming in, and SECI, or Solar Energy Corporation of India, conducting the online bids where the developers could basically bid in, and it was an online real-time bid which happened and which keeps on happening now. We have developed a very robust platform, and you can see a real-time, the auction happens and you can literally see the price going down, because the developers compete depending on their capability and where they want to focus in. And we are really seeing the costs are coming down drastically in the last few years. And the government has also given a lot of clarity in terms of interstate transmission charges, other regulatory aspects. And other thing which has also come is the manufacturing linked tenders, because the government also wants to push for the job generation. So some of these tenders which are now coming out are linked with manufacturing linked tenders. What that means is you have to have a local component. For example, local manufacturing of solar panels have to be there, or a certain percentage of the components have to be manufactured within the country. Even though in those components, government understood that tariffs will be a little bit higher than the tenders which allowed 100% imports. So those initiatives actually are now helping to jumpstart the manufacturing side of the industry as well, which in turn are generating jobs for solar panel manufacturing. Now a lot of inverter manufacturing have also started. In addition, there are cables, structures, and other ancillary units have also started coming up within the country. India has also taken a lead in forming a international solar alliance with France, and now majority of the countries are signatory to it. And our Honorable Prime Minister recently launched an ambitious project, One Sun, One World, One Grid, and to connect the entire world. So these are ambitious plans which the country is working on. And And as a developer, we're basically finding opportunities to scale as well. We can go to the next slide as well. Thank you. And distributed solar or rooftop solar, where mostly focused on, where we focus is commercial industrial projects. So where we see our business actually took off when the net metering policies came in across the state. And net metering basically means is, for example, if you are not working on Sunday, if it's a school, you have a system on, solar project on, and the electrons can actually now flow back to the grid, and you can meter how many electrons you have exported to the grid, and you can get credit for the export what you have made to the grid. So and the price will be of electrons which you are selling to the grid is equivalent to what you are basically importing. So this significantly impacted the overall growth of the sector, and majority of the states have now adopted net metering. Although there were a lot of initial hurdles and regulatory challenges were there, but a majority of the states are now moving or have moved towards the net metering aspect of it. The other thing which has happened is SECI, which is again Solar Energy Corporation of India. What they did was, because the government has a lot of rooftops, there are multiple public sector undertaking, other ministries, institutions, universities, schools, and those individual institutions were not capable enough of drafting the RFPs and coming out with the rooftop solar tenders. So SECI basically launched a national program where they conducted an online tender for rooftop tenders, and they divided the country in multiple zones depending on the irradiation. And once you qualify for that particular zone, then you can basically go to the qualified government agency and you can sign. And this the template documents are already in place, including the PPA document, power purchase document, which is a 25-year agreement. And you can basically, the government entity which is going to host the roof can sign that the PPA, because the developer is already qualified, and he's already qualified under or has secured the contract under the reverse bidding, which have happened online. So this initiated a massive rollout across government rooftops, be it institutions or any manufacturing, which was institutions which were basically powered by the government. So now in the country, you'll see a lot of government institutions are also, without any putting their own capital, they have signed PPAs for 25 years to buy power. The central government has also mandated multiple for its buildings to use solar power. The other success story has been railways, Indian Railways, which is the largest railway network in the world. They've already executed 250 megawatts of solar projects, and the current tenders are SIS 2 plus gigawatt, which are currently active, both in terms of CapEx as well as OpEx. Currently, there's a 1 gigawatt or 1,000 megawatt of PPA based tenders, and 1,000 megawatt of where railways are themselves going to put their own money in. And the reason is a lot of railway locations, either stations or locomotive factories, they're in remote locations. Sometimes they have to use diesel gensets, so their cost of procurement is very high. So railways are banking very heavy on solar, and they see a lot of cost savings coming in by deploying solar. Indian airports have been a success story as well, including we have implemented multiple airports, including the Delhi airport, as I've shown the picture. The other thing is now literally there is no subsidies. Initially there were subsidies, but with the grid parity coming in, there is no subsidies, and solar has become basically a free market. The interesting thing which has also happened is now the virtual metering of or open access. This is the third last bullet point has happened. This is a new market which has opened up. For example, if you are a large factory, but your rooftop is limited, but your consumption is very high, so you can developer can set up within the same state solar project and virtually meter to you and provide the electricity, and basically in DISCOM or the utility pays, you get some benefit. You pay some benefit to the utility for utilizing their transmission network or distribution network. So this has become a big success story. Initially, one of the southern states, Karnataka, started it, and now multiple states have started it. And we have seen now few gigawatts of solar being implemented under open access platform, and it becomes a win-win situation where the utility also is getting paid for monetizing their existing network of wires and poles. And floating solar is starting to emerge in the next big story, because we are seeing there are a lot of either dams which have large reservoirs and other areas where large ponds are there. So we are seeing now floating, I think there are a couple of 100 megawatts of solar floating projects which are already awarded. In fact, we have also recently bid one floating plus storage project in North Andaman, which is one of the islands on the eastern side of India, where we will be putting a 6 megawatt of floating project along with storage on the dam's reservoir. So those new aspects, and this was all run through Solar Energy Corporation of India, and its online bidding, RFP was all templatized. So it gives a lot of confidence for investors as well. And a lot of hybrid solar is also happening because India has a lot of islands as well. So where primary source was diesel, and the cost of power procurement was as high as 50-60 rupees a unit. And now with implementing solar plus storage plus diesel, the cost of procurement will also come down. We can go to the next slide, please. So this is an example of a project. This is we have recently working on this islands of Lakshadweep, a series of islands. So this is on the south western part of India, where we are powering 4 islands with solar and storage. These 4 islands are currently powered by diesel genset. And so we are installing 3 megawatt hour of storage and 2 megawatt hour of solar, and hybriding with diesel, and we will be operating the grid of the island as well for next 10 years. So it comes with a bundled package of maintaining it, the power as well. So those new aspects are also coming in. We can go to the next slide, please. This is example of more technical, basically on what we have done is here, it's integrated solar, 1400 kilowatt of solar with, this is one example of one particular project, and with in the daytime we can use it as is, and in the nighttime, because we're running with diesel as well for partial load, we're utilizing a battery bank as well, and this all get integrated to the DC load and gets integrated along with the diesel genset, and where we manage to an energy management system. And the idea is to minimize or literally shut the diesel generator off. And we have been operating similar type of projects for last few years on the mainland. So a lot of understanding has gone in place. So this has been possible because there was a clear clarity on the contracts, and we know that we're going to get paid. And at the end of the day, the local government is also very, very supportive in implementing these new initiatives. We can go to the next slide, please. This is another example of floating solar and storage solution, where we are implementing a floating solar on the reservoirs, dams reservoir of 6 megawatt. And daytime we will be utilizing power directly from, partly power directly from the solar, and during nighttime we will be storing power and basically utilizing through the storage part, and then hybriding with there's a hydro plant, and then here we are integrating the islands DG as well, and synchronizing using energy management system and powering the island. So, and this is interestingly, this project is going to be owned by us. It's going to be a PPA for 25 years. So these type of opportunities are also starting to come up. Go to the next slide, please. So, we are seeing that interesting. So by the way, this is a project which we have implemented in Philippines at one of the malls over there. But the country has successfully demonstrated the goals and then have been followed up with it. But there have been a lot of challenges in implementing these projects and on the policy and the regulatory perspective. But there has been a political will, administrative will, through which we are as a country are successfully developing these projects, implementing these projects. And I think now, as Kanika has also mentioned, we are attracting capital as well in the country, and the manufacturing jobs are also starting to gear up. We will be happy to, in fact, share more details on how we can help out on the Indonesia success story. And all the best wishes for the next few years and scaling up in Indonesia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kusagra, for your insights. I see that you, as a private company itself, is very confident on the government policy on promoting renewables in India. So maybe my question for the Q&A session later is about like how is it that you place a very good faith in the government policy and target, and also the arrangement of the auction, like held by SECI itself. And also on the technical side, because we have yet to heard 100 gigawatt of solar energy is huge, and how that the Indian grid can cope with that, or maybe there is an alternative or development in the smart grid or also storage system to balance that. We would like to hear more on that later. But now I will ask Mr. Fahmi Tumewa from IESR to share his perspective and opinion on how Indonesia can follow India's step to bring out that gigawatt order of solar energy.
Yeah, thank you, Chitra. And first of all, I would like to thank to all panelists, in particular Kanaka. Nice to meet you again, and Kusagra. It's first time to meet you, and thank you for sharing your experience in India. And we hope that we can learn from India in terms of achieving the goals of Indonesia in developing our solar. I just give some pointers in regards to the learn from India experience. I have my one slide here in English, but allow me to speak in Indonesia for the participants. And we have the translation, so you can also select the translation for the other non-Indonesian speaking participants. Mengapa India menarik dan bisa menjadi kasus buat Indonesia? Dan ini tadi sudah disampaikan ya. Tahun 2010 itu secara nasional India itu baru memasang 11 megawatt solar PV. Jadi kapasitasnya 2010 itu baru 11 megawatt. Dan di 2020 itu sudah mencapai hampir 40 gigawatt ya. Jadi ada kenaikan kira-kira lebih dari 3.000 kali dalam waktu 10 tahun. Dan bahkan kalau dilihat ya, itu tidak berhenti di sana, tapi India sendiri kemudian menetapkan target yang lebih tinggi untuk mencapai 200 gigawatt solar saja. Dan ini menjadi menarik buat pengalaman India. Tadi Kanaka menyatakan no backsliding, dan ini yang perlu mungkin dalam konteks Indonesia hari ini. Kita punya kebijakan ya, tetapi punya kebijakan dan punya target, tetapi belum diturunkan bagaimana kita bisa mencapai target itu. Kita punya target misalnya 23% energi terbarukan 2025, di dalamnya adalah 6,5 gigawatt solar, tetapi bagaimana mencapai itu belum dijelaskan secara rinci. Nah, ini yang menarik di India, karena India itu yang bisa kita lihat adalah mereka punya policy yang konsisten, dan itu diterjemahkan ke dalam satu target yang ambisius, ya, dan juga ada implementasi yang konsisten dari tahun ke tahun. Kalau kita lihat sejak pertama kali India mengumumkan program National Solar Mission Program itu di tahun 2008-2009, sampai hari ini telah berganti beberapa pemerintah. Ada beberapa perdana menteri yang telah berganti ya, dan kabinet yang berganti. Tetapi yang tidak berubah adalah target untuk mengembangkan energi terbarukan dan program-program yang dibuat oleh pemerintah untuk mengembangkan energi terbarukan khususnya surya. Dan tidak hanya itu, bahkan targetnya itu semakin meningkat. Jadi ada pemerintahan baru, targetnya tidak backsliding tapi semakin naik. Dan ini saya kira satu pelajaran pertama ya yang yang mungkin bisa kita lakukan di Indonesia. Ada policy, ada target, dan diturunkan ke dalam tadi yang disampaikan baby step gitu, how to achieve the target. Semuanya di infrastrukturnya itu disiapkan dengan baik. Yang kedua, pengalaman dari India juga menunjukkan bahwa memang diperlukan satu government body itu yang kemudian nanti bisa mengimplementasikan program dan target-target itu. Nah, di nasional itu ada sesi, tapi juga di state level ada state level renewable energy agency yang kemudian mengimplementasikan target-target tersebut ke dalam program dan proyek yang lebih real. Dan ini juga terkait sebenarnya dengan adanya renewable energy purchase obligation ya, di mana semua negara bagian di India itu mendapatkan kuota atau target untuk mencapai alokasi target untuk mendukung target yang sudah ditetapkan di dalam peraturan, dalam undang-undangnya. Nah, ini menarik karena pada saat ini kita juga sedang membahas rancangan undang-undang energi baru terbarukan, dan di sana ada usulan untuk memiliki instrumen serupa ya, renewable purchase obligation. Nah, ini mungkin bisa menjadi salah satu instrumen, dan sebenarnya kalau kita lihat juga di dalam kebijakan energi kita sudah ada rencana umum energi nasional diturunkan juga dengan rencana umum energi daerah. Nah, yang menjadi pertanyaan adalah bagaimana rencana umum energi daerah itu bisa didorong, bisa dimaksimalkan untuk membantu pencapaian target renewable energy yang sudah ditetapkan di Ken dan Rouen begitu. Nah, kita juga belajar dari pengalaman India yang juga penting, yang mungkin tadi belum disampaikan, tapi dari hasil studi kami memang menemukan bahwa sekali pemerintah membuat target, maka ada di energi terbarukan itu diprioritaskan ya untuk bisa dicapai. Nah, ini sebagai contoh misalkan India itu menerapkan yang namanya clean energy cess ya, jadi melakukan pungutan untuk setiap produksi batu bara di dalam negeri, dan dananya ini dipakai untuk mendorong proyek-proyek energi terbarukan di dalam yang masuk dalam National Clean Energy and Environment Fund. Jadi ada instrumen yang diciptakan di mana karena India juga salah satu produsen batu bara yang cukup besar, diciptakan instrumen untuk dalam tanda kutip dipajaki ya, tapi kemudian dananya dipakai untuk mendukung pengembangan energi terbarukan. Nah, selain itu tadi juga disampaikan bahwa ada financial assistance ya kepada project developer ya, dan memaksimalkan instrumen-instrumen public finance yang ada untuk memastikan risiko-risiko dari proyek itu bisa dikurangi gitu. Nah, ini lesson learn yang keempat, dan yang lesson learn yang kelima tadi renewable energy purchase obligation. Dan yang kalau kita lihat dari tadi disampaikan bahwa ada target ya yang cukup besar 200 gigawatt target. Nah, tetapi target itu kalau saya lihat dari India itu diturunkan memang di dalam berbagai skema, baik itu skema yang grid connected maupun off grid. Nah, kita bisa lihat misalnya ada skema yang berupa pengembangan solar park dan mega solar park gitu ya, di mana tadi yang disampaikan skemanya adalah plug and play sebenarnya ya, dan ini ditargetkan cukup besar. Lalu ada skema lain juga yang namanya skema yang dilakukan oleh badan-badan pemerintah begitu ya, juga itu ada. Nah, setiap skema itu memiliki implementasi rejim implementasi yang juga berbeda dan dukungan atau instrumen dukungan yang berbeda. Misalnya yang untuk pemerintah untuk yang dilakukan oleh badan-badan pemerintah itu ada instrumen yang namanya viability gap fund gitu yang bisa diakses ya, dan ini skemanya berbeda untuk on grid dan off grid. Nah, ini mungkin bisa menjadi juga pelajaran bagaimana kita bisa menurunkan target-target itu dalam berbagai skema yang mungkin untuk dilakukan dalam konteks Indonesia. Nah, yang juga menarik saya kira menjadi lesson learned adalah bagaimana India menggunakan competitive tender process yang bisa mendorong kemudian proyek-proyek itu mendapatkan harga yang termurah. Dari kira-kira 36 gigawatt yang sudah dibangun pertengahan tahun ini, kira-kira 32 gigawatt itu yang berdasarkan skema auction. Ya, dan ini cukup menarik karena kemudian sekarang skemanya juga dilakukan lakukan secara elektronik ya. Artinya skema itu yang coba didorong adalah transparansi dan persaingan yang sehat gitu ya, tidak ada hengki-pengki, dan ini menarik. Nanti mungkin bisa juga kita tanyakan lebih lanjut bagaimana pengembang-pengembang itu merasa confident dengan sistem ini gitu. Jadi building confidence dari developers itu menjadi penting ya, bahwa mereka tahu kalau mereka ikut satu tender yang terbaik lah yang akan menang. Nah, ini saya kira competitive tender process juga bisa kita pelajari di Indonesia. Dan yang tadi saya lihat juga terakhir adalah pelajarannya adalah mengenai land acquisition, khususnya untuk skema solar park, di mana pemerintah itu membeli dan mereka menyediakan lahan dan membangun ancillary infrastructure. Jadi dari ketersediaan lahan itu kemudian pemerintah melakukan tender ya, dan investor tinggal datang dan tadi tinggal plug and play ya, tinggal pasang pembangkitnya dan kemudian connect to the grid. Nah, ini saya kira menjadi penting karena buat di Indonesia sekarang isu penyediaan lahan, isu lahan itu sangat sensitif dan kritikal, dan kita tahu berbagai proyek energi terbarukan khususnya mungkin surya yang membutuhkan lahan yang cukup luas mengalami kesulitan ya. Perhitungan mengenai harga dari listriknya ya itu sangat juga bergantung, sangat sensitif bergantung dengan harga lahan yang bisa didapatkan oleh pengembang. Nah, mungkin cara-cara ini jika kita bisa mengambil pelajaran dari India dan mulai mengimplementasikan strategi ini, saya kira nggak terlalu sulit. Kalau tadi dikatakan mulai dari Indonesia sekarang yang 150 megawatt gitu, kalau kemudian bisa sampai 5 atau 6 gigawatt dalam 5 tahun mendatang untuk mencapai target RUEN. Mungkin itu dari saya, Citra. Terima kasih.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fabi, for taking the lesson learned from India and to how Indonesia could actually implement it to further boost solar deployment. I would like to have a comment from Pak Haris, because whenever we see there is a target and then there is policy and there is implementation, it always involves the government. So mungkin Pak Haris bisa memberikan komentar mengenai bagaimana apa yang dilakukan India, apakah cocok diterapkan di Indonesia atau kita perlu memakai tools lain gitu ya. Silakan Pak, 7 menit ya Pak ya.
Baik, terima kasih Mbak Citra. Thank you Ms. Kanika and also Mr. Kusagra. So it's very interesting presentation and very useful information for Indonesia to also try to boost our renewable energy implementation, especially for the PV photovoltaic. I think Pak Fabi already has a good explanation about what we already learned from India case. And then I would like to actually also try to explain what the Indonesia already preparing to also to develop more to accelerate the renewable energy implementation in Indonesia. I think now we are on progress to finalize President regulation related to the electricity, renewable energy electricity price that PLN will buy. And then I think several issues that already raised by Pak Fabi also considered in the implementation of the regulation. So let's say we for the first lesson related to the consistency policy. So now, yes, in Indonesia, mungkin bahasa Indonesia aja ya. Di Indonesia memang kita ketahui bahwa ada kesan kita tidak konsisten di dalam melaksanakan regulasi. Setiap ganti menteri, polisinya juga berbeda. Nah, ini mungkin apa namanya, hal ini perlahan-lahan kita coba perbaiki dengan sekarang ini kita mengangkat regulasi itu dalam bentuk peraturan presiden, sehingga nanti tidak mudah menteri melakukan perubahan-perubahan dari regulasi yang terkait dengan energi terbarukan itu sendiri, khususnya mengenai harga. Kemudian terkait dengan specialized government body untuk menerapkan seperti di Malaysia ada SEDA, di Korea ada Korea Energy Agency, di kita memang belum ada. Nah, harapannya nanti karena kita juga akan membahas mengenai rancangan undang-undang energi terbarukan, so we hope that under this renewable energy law we will also put this is the specialized government body to implement more renewable energy in Indonesia. Kemudian yang terkait dengan prioritas renewable energy, saya rasa sekarang kita sudah melakukan itu melalui regulasi government regulation on national energy policy, and then we already put also the target for renewable energy in that regulation, and now we are in progress to achieve the target. But yes, like you already know that now Indonesia in the energy mix, renewable energy in the energy mix, still our achievement is still far from the target. Our target 23%, but now we are in implementation only 9.15%, so still far. Yang berikutnya support fund, ya memang kalau bicara support fund kita banyak yang tertarik untuk bisa membantu di dalam finance, tetapi ketika kita bicara mengenai bankability project, nah di situ menjadi PR-nya kita karena banyak project gagal ketika itu dianalisa lebih dalam lagi ternyata tidak bankable, feasibility study-nya misalnya tidak visible, kemudian ada faktor-faktor yang lain lagi yang membuat itu tidak bisa terlaksana. Nah, dengan adanya regulasi nanti yang peraturan presiden, di sana ada so we put many incentive in the upcoming new regulation related to the president regulation on this renewable energy price. So di dalam perpres itu nanti we put the support from many government body. So at about 11 government body also we include in the policy to support renewable energy implementation, like a Ministry of Finance is must, Ministry of state-owned company, Ministry of BKPM, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Home Affairs, Environment, and Ministry of Maritime and Investment also have a special authority in the regulation. Dan juga in this regulation we are also put the mechanism, new mechanism like incentive also to government will provide like a subsidy, but we call it compensation to fill the gap between the cost of PLN in the region with the price we already set in the in the President regulation. And related to the price under this President regulation, we have at least two mechanisms of feed-in tariff and also selling price. So the feed-in tariff will implement to renewable energy implementation until 5 megawatt capacity for the hydro, for wind, solar, biomass, biogas, and then there is another mechanism for selling price. So let's say for hydro will be like negotiation based on negotiation of price, but the procurement still a direct appointment. And then only for solar, wind, biomass, biogas, we develop a procurement using bidding tender process. So from this incentive, so we hope that financial issue will be reduced. I mean, the barrier of financial issue will be reduced. And next lesson learned is related to renewable purchase obligation. So I think we don't have this policy. So I think under the next renewable energy law, we also considering to put also this kind of policy. The next is related to the various scheme for on-grid and off-grid. Now, especially for PV, now we try to create a market for the PV by try to develop a large scale also. But from the implementation of our new regulation, we already have a good communication with the Asian Development Bank to support us to provide a guideline. How do we develop procurement to achieve the lowest price for especially for the PV? And for this activity, we have a planning to implement in Sumatra. We try to develop until 200 megawatt for the tender. And related to the competitive tender, so I think this is also include what you already explained. And land acquisition, this is also one of the issue. We try also to discuss, especially with the Ministry of Home Affairs, how do we provide this land, and then how do we make it more easy related to the license. I think this is what we already provide now, and if you ask when the regulation will issue, I would like to say that now we are already in finalized step by the concept already in Ministry of Law for harmonization process. This is the last step before regulation or the draft of regulation come to the President. Thank you, Pak. Thank you, Mbak Citra.
Okay, terima kasih Pak Haris. Thank you, Mr. Haris, for highlighting Indonesia's effort to boost solar and also renewable energy development. I think we are all here eagerly waiting for the presidential regulation to pass, and we really would like to see how the incentives and also the procedures and everything that has been mentioned in the regulation could promote renewable energy development in Indonesia. Okay, next I would like to have comments from Bu Cita Dewi, the EVP of Renewable Energy from PLN. Ibu, I think as utility companies in Indonesia, PLN plays a very important role in integrating renewables into its operation. So maybe you could share your perspective on this, especially on solar, and also questions on is PLN grids ready to absorb a lot of renewables into the grid? Silakan Bu.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Cita. Good afternoon all. Selamat sore Pak Haris, selamat sore Pak Feby.
Selamat sore Bu Cita.
Good afternoon also from Indian Corporation. Yeah, it is very interesting lesson, and it is a good lesson learned for us, especially we are part of SOE who shall implement all which already regulated by the government. This afternoon, I have many items that should be considered during PLN's going to implement what that will be in our next progress. But at least based on the previous explanation, we are happy to hear, especially about the parameter which should be managed, and it has happened also at PLN. That's why especially we want to have more sharing from you, especially the development right now, renewable, especially for PV. Items shall be managed by us related to the system readiness, because system readiness right now is must take into the account and how is the cost impact dealing with intermittent energy, because we have some experience as well in part of other island related to the intermittent. And next program due to next new regulation and also our long-term planning, we have to adopt at least around 5 to 2 gigawatt for PV. That's why we are in a parallel right now to do some study as well, especially for the intermittent, and then waiting for the regulation which will be announced by the government. But based on this target, we are still open for a discussion as well, perhaps in the next moment. But at least right now, I want to know more about the system readiness, especially what is in India, and then financing of the RE project, as we heard from Haris already mentioned, that the government also having a relationship with others. And we are happy as well because many financing right now already contact us for further cooperation, not only during the project execution, but starting from the studying. It is very interesting. And then what is happened right now, even pandemic is all over the world, this also make PLN have to create the demand. So maintaining supply and balance is one of the reasons that we have to consider more about what is the exact number, even though we have to achieve the target to accomplish the 23% in 2025. And then about the regulation right now, in parallel, we already have a new policy as well for PLN to adopt the current regulation, which is already launched by the MEMR on February 2020. So we are still utilizing this policy, even though waiting for the new resident decree. And then for the last, about the prospect in the Indonesian market, as we understand that right now, we have to achieve, we still have gap around 9 gigawatt to achieve this number. So hopefully by having experience what is already implemented in India and also Vietnam, because it is very attractive as well, we want to make any further discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bu Chita, for explaining what PLN's plan in regards to absorb more renewable energy. I think the comments on the pandemic situation is also relevant globally. So later I would ask Kanika and also Mr. Kusaga to have the story on how the pandemic affects renewable energy development there. Before we go to the Q&A session, I would like to hear comments from Indonesia Solar Association, represented by Pak Bambang Sumaryo, in regards to this boom in India and how Indonesia could follow suit, or also to provide an example how we can join the Gigawatt Club of solar energy.
Okay, thank you very much on behalf Pak Andika, I would like to say one or two words. Regarding to India, I think that the best example that we can see from India learning about the renewable energy is a consistency of government and all effort made by all government. That's I think that's the one that key success factors for India to jump from 10 megawatt in 2010 to now is over 42 gigawatt implementation of solar. While Indonesia probably in the same year 2010 we have more solar than in India, but now we are much less than India. However, there's some other factors as well that the big difference between India and Indonesia is that India is one land mass, one big land mass that also the grid is probably is not one super grid all across India, but Indonesia is getting worse because as island countries and a small grid in a small island, that is very difficult to integrate to main grid. So for that reason, the progress is quite different. The challenge and the the problem is much different. For the main island, the difference between India and Indonesia is of course land availability. Our main grid is basically in Java, Bali, and Madura only. So, and in those location, solar park or big solar park gigawatt, it's a bit difficult, almost no existent land of availability. That is our point of view, and the rest I think is we still have to wait what will become on out of the presidential decree, because this one will determine whether we are getting serious or we are just doing some minor thing for the solar implementation. That's my word. Thank you. Back to you, Miss Citra.
Yes, thank you, Pak Sumario. I think that's also good questions that um, in terms of land availability and how Indonesia as an archipelagic nation has to deal with inequality in electricity projection and demand and also well resources. That also one good thing to be taken seriously by the government on how we think more about decentralized energy process, for example, that's mentioned by Kusagra in his presentation. For now, I would like to take questions from the participants. I already highlighted several questions to both of our Indian panelists. So this is a question for Kanika. In terms of financial cost, I think you mentioned that financial cost attractive to investors, and also what the government can do to actually help with this financial cost. And also there's a question about local content requirements. I think it's a great debate how we promote cheaper products or cheaper electricity generation, but in the same time we also want to have higher local content requirements in solar development, because we also want to contribute to domestic solar industry. And I will also have the question to Kusagra after Kanika answer this. The first is how the pandemic affects solar business in India. Is it like very significant, or how do you see the projection for the coming year after the COVID-19 crisis, hopefully soon? And the second thing is my questions on the good faith of the government is the consistency of the government in to convince private sectors that it's a good investment, or like do you need other factors to consider to actually developing solar projects in India and also globally? Please, Kanika.
Okay, thank you very much, Chitra. Very good questions, both of them. So on financing quickly, like I said, we used to actually have an even higher cost of finance, which has come down. But even now, I would say for distributed renewable energy projects, or say like some of the new types of projects that Kushagra mentioned, like floating solar or in smaller island states, etc., the cost of capital continues to be, in some cases, prohibitively high. Which actually then puts further burden on the counterparty, because you are then not necessarily doing the kind of $4 or $5 kind of tariffs, but much higher tariffs, right? How do you bring that cost down? That is really, the $1 million question, and that I think is less easy than going from megawatts to gigawatts. But I think it's important to understand why is cost high, and so cost is high for two reasons. So all of the cost is best, I think, measured in terms of what is the risk premium, or the premium you have to pay on a loan. A large part of that is risk premium. One part of that is because there's a lack of familiarity that investors have with new markets, right? So if you've never invested in something before, you are unlikely to want to do that. That gets further complicated when we're trying to get international capital, because they're less familiar with our markets as well. So say, for instance, if I was to invest in a rooftop solar project in Indonesia, I've never made an investment in Indonesia before, which is one reason why my risk perception is high. And I've never invested, or anybody has not really invested at scale in rooftop projects, right? So the combination of that makes it very expensive to borrow. What we need to do is, number one, bring down the risk perception. That's actually what a lot of what we do at CEW, Center for Energy Finance, is towards that. And a lot of this can be done through information. If we have all of the data that is being generated through the power sector, as well as on these financial transactions freely available, it's much easier to make a correct assessment of the risks rather than to overestimate the risks. So information asymmetry is a big contributor to risk perception, and we try and take that away. But that's only one part. There are real risks as well, and those are the ones that I outlined on my slides. And that's where public money becomes really important. The government does not just signal the target, but they should also kind of, put their money where their mouth is. And what I mean by that is, instead of doing subsidies, maybe they should use a small amount of public money to do de-risking, which can be in the form of first loss guarantees, through credit enhancement. But using public money to do project financing is the least leverage way of using public money. But using public money to create a conducive environment for private money to come into the market is the way that you can really stretch government investment. So I think those are ways in which you can eventually bring down the cost of borrowing, and then in the short term kind of bypass some of these risks by showing the government's commitment to the sector. On the question around manufacturing, it's a really topical question for me to be answering, because it's a debate that we're seeing right now in India. And what we're seeing is that because as much as 80% of our solar PV supply chain is actually dependent on China and some Chinese operations in other Southeast Asian countries, of course, because of COVID, a lot of that supply chain has been delayed and hit. And now, as many of you may know, there's a geopolitical changes between India and China, which are also then making this a big risk factor. So I would imagine, and not that the government ever said it, but the way that I observed the market in the past, it was, importing panels from China are so cost competitive. So basically, it's a 33% price difference. That means that panels from China are 1/3 cheaper than panels made in India. It's significant, right? So even though we always tried to develop domestic manufacturing as well, the focus was also on keeping tariffs low. So it was, let us, generate cheap electricity in India to manufacture everything else except the solar panel, because that is cheaper in China. But now, because of geopolitics, energy security, COVID-19 related supply chain disruptions, we are moving towards a more kind of what our Prime Minister calls a kind of self-reliant India, where we do want to kind of capture as much of the economic value from the entire supply chain within the country. And to do that, we are currently already using a safeguard duty on imports, but also a basic customs duty is also being contemplated, which will provide a 2 to 5 year period for India to develop additional capacity, not just in in sort of module manufacturing, but also in cell, wafer, ingot. So sort of really the deep down into the supply chain. That being said, my personal view based on research is that it is important to make the kind of policy moves that capture the most amount of economic value and jobs in the country, but we cannot also become insular. It is important to still continue to think about the importance of global supply chains, as well as to think about playing to your advantage. Every country has a comparative advantage, and a collaborative approach actually will take us much further, much faster than I will figure it all out on my own kind of approach. Which is also why I would like to once again thank you for organizing this, because I do think that both countries would do better together than apart. So I think that this is already a step in the right direction.
Okay, thank you, Kanika. I think it's also important to highlight that whenever we compare energy transition globally, sometimes we use the examples of European countries, which is not necessarily in the same condition with Indonesia. So we're really glad to have a better perspective on how to develop renewable energy with more similar countries with us. Please, Kusadra, I think you get my question, or do you need me to repeat the question?
I think it will be good if you can repeat the questions.
Okay, the first question is about the pandemic situation because it has impacted a lot of renewable energy deployment worldwide. So how do you think that it impacts India condition and also globally? And maybe your projection for the post-COVID-19 situation. And the second thing is, in order, because I said previously that you place a good faith in the government consistency to develop good renewable energy policy. Is it sufficient only for the consistency of target and also policy, and maybe there is a special body to regulate that, or also you have to consider other factors in building your confidence to move into the renewable energy business?
All right, thank you. So I think the first question first. Interestingly, so India had a national lockdown from end of March through June 1st. So the construction activity literally stopped from end of March to early June across the country. So that impacted renewables, including solar projects as well, including our own sites. And then the workers which were at those sites had to go back to their home states, and then so it took time for them to come back. So the construction has restarted, was sometime towards the end of June, early July. So now the construction activity, I would say, are at the pace of maybe 70-80% level. It will take another month or so to get into the full stream. Interestingly, what has happened over the lockdown period is, I think, as we are also doing this webinar over the Zoom call today, I think we all have learned innovative ways to communicate. And so one of the interesting things what has happened is our own team, earlier our team used to travel across different sites and meeting our clients. So now clients are also preferring to do a VC. So I think a closure rate over over these VCs have started to make an impact, and we're only going to these client meetings when towards the final stages of approval. I think that is eventually what we are learning, and that is also helping in reduce the cost of closure as well. The other thing what has happened is Solar Energy Corporation of India, they interestingly came out with multiple hundreds of megawatts of tenders over the COVID lockdown period from March through August. And this whole tendering happened online. There was, you have to just upload your documents, upload the bank guarantees, and then you have to, once you technically qualify and financially qualify, then you can basically participate in online, and they give you a timeline at what time. Let's say it's at 2 p.m. at this particular day, the tender is going, the reverse bidding is going to start. So let's say there are 5 bidders in that particular bid. So your name is camouflaged so that bidders cannot see each other's name, and you're camouflaged with a certain code, and your numbers are against each other. And then it's a real-time auction which happens. Hundreds and megawatts of auctions were completed during that lockdown period, and a lot of companies have now secured large contracts. So there is a good backlog now which has been created, especially for the large scale tenders. For the commercial industrial rooftops as well, because the industries were more or less closed. So I think there was a hit on the industrial sector, but for the government sector, there were a lot of tenders which are pushed. So I think there is a backlog which is starting to happen in that segment. But I think for the residential and industrial, it will take another few months to start to come over. And as the economy starts coming back, so it's both been a learning cycle during this lockdown period, and the impact has been real. I think it's across the globe what has happened. The second question to that part is on the government support perspective. India, the electricity is a state subject, although the federal government, which has been consistent, second time re-elected, they provide the goals and objective, and they try to push for. But the states have their own governments. Certain governments are aligned to the national government, and so sometimes there can be some differences of opinion. So, but the thing is, now people realize that it's a development part, and that solar is a cheapest source of electricity now, or energy. So rather than, and it's a clean energy at the end of the day. So even though there may be some political differences, but I think a majority of the government are supporting the implementation of solar projects. The challenges are, because electricity being a state subject, there are some regulatory challenges from state to state you have to deal with sometimes. But I think it's getting resolved. The new Electricity Act or draft amendment is in place. Probably it'll get, it may get tabled in this parliament session or next. If that happens, then I think a lot of these regulatory differences which are there may get sorted out, which may actually strengthen the implementation of solar in the country, including the RPO obligation. There may be a clear window of till 2030. So government is already thinking almost a decade ahead of implementing projects to ensure these RPO are compliant for. So I think there are challenges as in both of our countries. And in democracies, the challenges are also important. So, but the political will is there.
Okay, we heard a lot of times that political will plays a very important role in how we perceive this target as a national target or long-term target, on how we work together between national government, state government, or provincial government in this case, and also with utility companies. Thank you for pointing that out. I think it's safe to say that we in Indonesia also call for stronger political will from the government to ensure that renewable energy development, and especially solar, the cheapest source of energy right now, to flourish in Indonesia very soon. Okay, I see a question to Pak Haris and also Bu Cita. This is a question actually from Pak Sumario, that there is this circulating news that there is an intention of East Nusa Tenggara government to build a solar farm as big as 20 gigawatt there. Is it possible to implement, or is it something that's actually on the government plan, and how PLN sees this plan to develop more renewables, especially in the eastern Indonesia where it's needed the most, and also to bring down the cost? Pak Haris, maybe your comments?
Yeah, thank you, Bu Citra. I think if we also need to consider many aspects, yeah, to implement this idea. So we know that in Nusa Tenggara, so the potential of a solar PV is very huge, and then it could be transmit the electricity from Nusa Tenggara to the big grid in Java. But I think we need to consider how much cost must be provided to develop transmission. So transmission from Nusa Tenggara to the nearest grid in the, let's say, in a Nusa Tenggara and Bali. I think if we can develop optimally and then also efficiently, I think this could be implemented. But again, so we need to also, I think, as technical aspect need to be considered also, because like Ibu Chita mentioned before that, the readiness of the system also is one of the our concern, because the intermittent issue. Thank you, Bu.
Bu Chita, I would like the comments from you about this plan, and maybe on the awaiting revision of RUPTL. How do we improve the renewable energy integration into the new RUPTL?
Thank you, Mbak Chitra. Yeah, in addition to Pak Haris already give a brief explanation, especially for the additional capacity from Nusa Tenggara. First, yes, correct. We have to review and consider about the technical aspect first, especially once again system readiness, because we already know that it is intermittent, so we have to make a technical judgment first related to the system. And then second, what is your question, Mbak Chitra, related to the RUPTL?
I think all of us here also waiting for the new revised RUPTL. If there will be any additional renewable energy capacity or like more ambitious plans in PLN's new plan.
Yeah, right now the RUPTL is still in the discussion between PLN and EMR. We are still waiting also for the one who will be agreed by the MR. In this point, as I was informed before, that we have to achieve the EBT on 2025. It is equivalent to 8 gigawatt. The additional for EBT, it is an approximate number. Because right now the installed capacity of the renewable energy is around 7.9 gigawatt. That's 7.9, yes, 7.9 gigawatt. And then we still have a gap there. So we have to achieve around 8.5 to 9 gigawatt. And it is comprises of sure hydro, geothermal, and PV as well. And PV take a big portion, especially in the eastern Indonesia. It is a very good for the potential to develop PV. And we have a program also for the conversion of the existing diesel power plant, because right now we know that we are still imported also for the oil, yeah. How to reduce the oil, and because it is imported, and to help government as well. So we are having in this RES program to convert the existing diesel genset into renewable energy plant, and can be PV and others as well. That's what the shortest program.
Okay, thank you, Bu Chita. I think now this is the last question that I would ask probably to Kanika or also Mr. Kusagra. There is a question about intermittency or grid readiness. I mean, with that number of solar generation, like reaching almost 100 gigawatt, how does the Indian utilities deal with the grid? Is there any storage system or smart grid or demand control, something like that?
It's a very good question, in fact. So a couple of things which are happening to address this issue, because majority of large-scale solar projects are happening in the northwestern state of Rajasthan, where the land is in abundance and irradiation is quite high. But the challenge earlier, there was the power lines were not there, or they were weaker power lines. So what the Power Grid Corporation of India is doing in coordination with Solar Energy Corporation of India, they are strengthening the transmission lines or building new transmission lines and connecting it to the national grid. The other thing which has happened in the last few years, the entire northeast, east-west grids have now synchronized. So the one so concept called one nation, one grid. So the country is now working on a basically called a synchronized grid. So the areas where and it's already getting planned for even the newer plants which are coming up, the grids are getting strengthened. The other thing which is also happening is government is also now testing with the real-time markets in terms of adding storage as well in a lot of these projects. So we are seeing now new solar plus storage tenders are starting to come out. And in areas where the grids are weaker, for example, these island scenarios where, in fact, we are working into actually 5 now on different islands. So we are providing storage along with solar and connecting it or hybriding it with diesel gensets in those areas as well. So it's not a single solution for one problem. So it's basically multiple solutions which are getting devised. Areas where it requires grid strengthening, the grid strengthening is happening. Where it requires storage, storage is getting planned and getting implemented. But it's a challenge. It's a real world challenge, and trying to face it out. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for providing that. I believe that there's no one shoes fit all. We have to see the context, and also we can create the balance between generation and also demand itself. And also, I'm very interested that now India has optioned projects with also storage, because we've heard multiple times that the storage price is still too high. So I think we also would like to see India's experience in this. Maybe it will bring the cost down significantly in the coming years. So thank you for that. And because of the time, I think I have to close this session. It is very interesting sharing from both Kanika, Busadra, Mr. Fadi, Bujita, and also Haris and Pak Sumario for Indonesia Solar Association. I will not conclude this session, but instead I will ask each of every one of you to give closing remarks, maybe some kind of advice, some kind of insights that we need to understand in order to promote more solar deployment, both in India and Indonesia, and also globally. Maybe Kusada can start with.
So I would just add that both of our countries, India and Indonesia, have a beautiful cultural past together. And I think this solar and renewables provide a real world opportunity to learn from each other and scale together and build a future together. Thank you.
Kanika, please, your closing statement.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't unmute for a moment. I think that, exactly what Kushagra said, and as I was saying earlier, we are better if we collaborate. One of the things that's come up in the questions as well, and I think is important to realize, is as I started, every country will have its own unique energy transition, which is to say that we can learn from each other, but we can't necessarily just copy each other. It's only because, in a country as large and as diverse as India, and because we are a little bit ahead, we've kind of encountered all of these same challenges. And, again, as examples, there are island states where there are learnings that would be applicable. And then there's intermittency, and then, there's learnings that's applicable. There's the poor financial health of distribution companies, again, something that we can share. So I think it's important to see what fits, but also in terms of recommendation, and again, a learning from India is that it isn't just the one top line message. It is really very much about taking a holistic view and combining industrial policy, combining financial and economic policy, combining labor policy, and thinking about the just transition along with the energy policy. So that, I think, is an important recommendation. Thank you.
Haris, please.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Chitra. So I think Indonesia now in the step to increase the acceleration of renewable energy, especially for the PV. So now, like I mentioned before, now we are on progress to finalize the president regulation, and then we hope that this president regulation could speed up the implementation of renewable energy in Indonesia, especially also for the PV. And now we are open for collaboration with all potential partner to join with us, financial institution, donor, and many other stakeholders can join with us to develop more renewable energy to maximize of what we already have the potential. And then especially for the PV, we much learn from India. And then I think we can copy and pass your mechanism. And then we provide the suitable regulation in Indonesia to accommodate the implementation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Pak Haris. Hopefully we can promote solar energy soon and push Indonesia to the Gigawatt Club. Bu Chita, your closing remarks, please.
Thank you, Mbak Chitra. Yes, as I heard from the previous presenter, it is correct that every country have a unique approach, especially in Indonesia. We have many islands, scattered island with different condition, and also the policy approach is different. That's why the project implementation, starting from the permit, technical aspect, and financing will have a different approach with others country. But at least today, I am very happy hearing from the experience from India and others. It is giving us a benefit and how they can overcome the condition, so they can boost the implementation of the renewable by having a significant number. Hopefully, after the RUPTL sign, and also we are waiting for the presidential decree, we can implement and to achieve the government target on 2025. Because I'm sure that we have the same vision here to develop renewable energy. It is not only for us, once again, but for the next generation as well.
Okay. Thank you. It is for future generation. That's the important remark. Okay, I will ask Mr. Fabi Tumiwa to also give a closing remark.
Yeah, thank you. All panelists, all speakers, Kanika, Kusagra, Pak Haris, Bu Chita, and also Pak Sumario and all attendants. I hope this webinar give us ideas, and also we can learn how to accelerate the renewable energy deployment, in particular solar. I think there's a lot of commonalities between India and Indonesia, not only from cultural aspect, but looking at the electricity sectors. We have India have a strong reliance on coal now, but moving to the energy transition. Indonesia's 65% of our power generations actually from coal. And but if we look at India case, we can increase and speed up renewable energy deployment, in particular solar. Look at India 10 years ago, you only have like 11 megawatt, is even less than the total capacity of solar in Indonesia 10 years ago. But now you are like more than 40 gigawatt, and we are still like maybe around 150 something megawatt, which is it's stark different. But we can see how India pacing in the last 10 years. And I think we can learn from the experience and adapt what has been done in India in our political context. A number of panelists mentioned about this regulation, the presidential regulation. It is, I hope it will be the good regulation and could boost renewable energy. But also, I think we shouldn't only rely to think other policy instrument that can really reduce the risk, as we also learn. And at the end, it's about the implementation, because any regulation policy without the implementation is nothing. We will not go anywhere. I think that's actually the challenge in Indonesia. We have a very nice policy. We have a nice target, ambitious one. But when it comes to the implementation, it is fall behind. I think that's what is actually the main challenge, how to implement properly and take baby step. I think we can start 300 megawatts, 500 megawatt, 1 gigawatt, and raise it to the level that we can increase beyond that number. I think India, I think we have to learn more from the experience, and again take that lesson learned into our context. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fabi Tumewa. That concludes all of our webinar today. You can still see the live stream on our YouTube channel, IESR Indonesia, if you want to see more, hear more, or want to take notes on how we can draw the lessons from India's experience. I would like to thank Kanika of CEEW, Mr. Kusadra of SunSource Energy, Pak Haris from Myanmar, Bu Cita from PLN, Pak Fabi from ISR, also Pak Sumario from Indonesia Solar Association. Thank you for all contributing to these discussions. The coverage of this webinar will also be posted in our website. And we will have our second series of the Gigawatt Club. We will invite speakers from Vietnam, as we see that Vietnam can boost the solar energy into gigawatt order in only 2 years, and we will also hear from them soon, and we will inform you with the exact date and also the platform we use for the webinar from the next webinar. Thank you all, and keep healthy and safe during this difficult time, and hopefully we can all support each other to promote renewable energy and better future for the world. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.